Marriage deficit in Jane Austen's Emma. Whilst marriage is one of the major themes of the novel, also, in a sense, marriage deficit is put forward as a substantial theme in this novel. In other words, we learn a lot about the state or the status of being an old maid or a spinster, as the situation of being unmarried as the years progressed would have been described at this period. Miss Bates illustrates really vividly the very strained and impoverished, not just financially, not just in the literal sense, but in the social sense, existence that might very well fall to the lot of the unmarried woman. At one point in the novel, Emma rationally reviews the situation of being unmarried. She weighs it up in analytical terms. She of course omits to really weigh in it with any great significance the emotional pros and cons of being married, of being single or being a wife, being single and unmarried, or being a mother. She doesn't really consider these topics at that level. She looks at it more in terms of actual circumstances, physical circumstances. Emma's conclusion is that being an unmarried woman is not an evil in and of itself, that it's perfectly possible for a woman to be happy and to be fulfilled, although not married, which is a much more modern position. However, it's partly a more modern position because there are so many more opportunities open to women of things that they can do if they don't get married. For Emma, the undesirability of not getting married largely comes from the fact that most unmarried women are poor, that they live in poverty. So Emma's rationale sums up the two sides like this. So Emma is able to see not getting married as an advantage because she is young, she is wealthy in her own right, she expects to inherit, she's an heiress, because owning land or owning property conferred, and still today confers, social status, and would confer social status onto a woman at this period as well. And it wouldn't, in other words, it wouldn't only confer status onto men. Holding property or land also conferred status onto a woman. Emma therefore would be able to be single without having the need to earn a living. And also, given her geographical position and the standing of her family in the area, she didn't have to worry about anybody openly insulting her or thinking that they could do so with impunity because she was a married woman without the protection of a husband, an unmarried woman without the protection of a husband. However, when we look at the reality of being unmarried as it arrives in Miss Bates's life, we can see that she is in late middle age, so she is more likely to see the departure from her life of her mother, whom she's taken care of. Her father has already died. All things being equal, her niece, whom she loves, is likely to go away, get married, establish her own family, or, as is also projected, go away and become a governess. So at this stage in life that there are fewer personal interests, and interests are also disappearing and dying away. So something that Emma doesn't take into consideration. Miss Bates, of course, as would be the case for many women who didn't marry, is impoverished, and she's dispossessed. So when her father died, when the male of the family died, she was left without his status and without the advantage of his income coming into her life. because, as discussed, it's difficult. Women didn't inherit. They couldn't take up a profession themselves, so they were dependent. So she kind of needed to marry in order to have a new head of the household, a new male head of the household, in order to avert the impoverished, dispossessed situation that she's in. Because she has neither money, nor property, nor land, she has very low social status. She has no viable means of earning a living. And she may be insulted with impunity. Nobody needs to be polite to Miss Bates. They can be openly rude, nothing will happen, just she will be upset. And there's no reason, because there's no male prominent in her life, to suppose she couldn't be insulted with impunity, according to the values of the time, I mean. As a result, Miss Bates becomes, the receiver of charity, really, and philanthropy from amongst the people in her social group. Now, according to Emma's rationale, there are various flaws, of course. One of her advantages of remaining single, is that she's making that analysis as a young woman with lots of energy and lots of interest, social interest around her. Of course, that quality of being young will decline with time. Also, as already mentioned in another video, as an unmarried woman, even if she has social status in her area through land and property, she will have to cede precedence to married women on lots of occasions. So, for example, Mrs. Elton, being a married woman, is taken into dinner ahead of Emma, even when the dinner is actually in Emma's own house, because Mrs. Elton is the married woman. And I think that this would grate with Emma over time. And as for wealth, we can see, so we see with Jane Fairfax as well, although she is still young, that she is beginning to fall victim to some of the disadvantages that affect her unmarried aunt. She is patronised by local society. She becomes a sort of worthy cause for the interests, sort of philanthropic interests or charitable donations of people in the area who perceive themselves as being better off than she is. Mrs. Elton is extremely condescending towards Jane, sees her as an opportunity for showing off her own married status and her own higher financial and social status, and inviting Jane to lots of different social functions that Jane's not really interested in going to. But Mrs. Elton probably quite liked to have her there because Jane is so accomplished. She's such a beautiful singer and such a beautiful pianist. And also she's travelled a little bit, so she's sophisticated and quite knowledgeable to make good conversation. But also, of course, Mrs. Elton spends a lot of time trying to find a position for Jane, which is not what Jane actually wants. It's very difficult as a young unmarried woman without very much money to alienate anyone. You sort of have to accept everything that comes your way, as Miss Bates does, with gratitude and without causing any kind of offence, even if you don't really appreciate it, because there may come a point where, without very secure independence, you actually need their assistance. So it is noticeable in Jane, very noticeable in Jane, that she can't act as her own independent woman. She can't be herself, in other words. She would be, despite all the ways in which women lost rights on entering marriage, if she married a loving partner who understood and appreciated her for her true character, a lot happier, a lot more free to express herself, and also much more secure and more respected if she were married. Miss Bates, if we think across the novels, as well as apart from just in this one, Miss Bates represents the potential fate that Eleanor and Marianne might well have come to in Sense and Sensibility, being dispossessed without having any sort of substantial amount of money to put down as a dowry, because of the sort of early decease of their father. It was going to be quite hard for them to get married. They also had moved out into the country, they didn't have a carriage, they didn't have easy means of getting up to London, and their half-brother is very surprised to see them in London at all. He thought he'd successfully got rid of them, I think, to the country. His impecunious relations, for whom he might have to do something if he saw them regularly. Mr. Knightley speaks very censoriously towards Emma on one occasion because she's been disrespectful towards Miss Bates, and he makes a variety of points about Miss Bates's social status through his quite firm censure of how Emma has behaved towards Miss Bates, and I think that it's not unjustified that he speaks to Emma. Feminist criticism may say, well, it's a man criticising a woman's behaviour. However, it is. However, it is justified because Emma has spoken very disrespectfully and very unkindly to Miss Bates. Mr. Knightley says, I acknowledge, well, they are blended, said he, I acknowledge, and were she prosperous, I could allow much for the occasional prevalence of the ridiculous over the good. Were she a woman of fortune, I would leave every harmless absurdity to take its chance. I would not quarrel with you for any liberties of manner. Were she your equal in situation, but Emma, consider how far this is from being the case. She is poor. She has sunk from the comforts she was born to, and if she lived to old age, must probably sink more. Her situation should secure your compassion. It was badly done indeed. You whom she had known from an infant, whom she had seen grow up from a period when her notice was an honour, to have you now, in thoughtless spirits and the pride of the moment, laugh at her, humble her. And he goes on. So, yes, single women at this period were open to derision, being sidelined. And although Eleanor and Marianne in Sense and Sensibility are both still young, they are very much sidelined by the new John Dashwood coming in as the sort of master of the estate that their father had held during his lifetime, and they're sidelined by his wife as well. It's not just the older woman, Miss Bates, that could happen to. And these themes play out across Jane Austen's novels time and time again. Women's status, how women can be dispossessed, how they can be sidelined in society, humbled, laughed at. There was quite a keen sense of the inferiority of women's social position expressed by Jane Austen in her novels.